Hey everyone, welcome back. This is the second video lecture. If you want to follow along, just download the PDF file. It's called Paleolithic and Neolithic eras or age, I can't remember. But just download that and I'll kind of talk you through it and you can follow along. I also uploaded something called Chapters 1 and 2 Timeline Notes. It's a 3-page timeline of chapters 1 and 2, so kind of the Paleolithic era, Neolithic era, and then Mesopotamia and Egypt. So if you want to, while you read the chapters and while you watch this video, you could write down maybe some of the more important ideas. It might just kind of help you organize the first 2 chapters, be helpful on the quiz, kind of write down the main points about every civilization. You don't have to remember everything. Every time I teach this class, I read the textbook, and every time I read the textbook, there's always something new I learn, even though I've read it before. So, not everything I read sticks with me. So, just kind of a way to help you out. So, kind of follow along. I'm on slide 2. During the 19th century, archaeologists created labels for the eras of human history, and they created these eras based on what tools were primarily used. So you have the Stone Age, you have the Bronze Age, you have the Iron Age. That just means during those periods of human history, the stuff we made, the tools we used, the weapons we used were made out of stone, then bronze, then iron. That's just kind of how they did it. The Stone Age, they break down into 2 eras, the Paleolithic and the Neolithic eras. And the important thing to remember is the dividing line between the Paleolithic and Neolithic eras. The dividing line is all based upon the domestication of plants and animals. Lots of scholars think that this might be the most important thing ever in human history, is when humans learned how to farm and domesticate animals. So that's important to remember. And I just want to mention something on these slides. The dates are very different, or they're very, I shouldn't say different. They differ based on what textbook you read. The last time I taught this class, I used a different textbook. This time I got the updated textbook, and the dates were all different. So it was like the 10th and the 11th editions, and they changed all the dates. So don't put too much stock in these dates. Once we get to the Greeks and the Romans, we're more sure about the dates. The Egyptians, we are pretty good about dates. But when you're talking about tens of thousands of years or whatever, nobody knows for sure the dates, so don't get too caught up on that. I do want to talk about this term prehistory. That just refers to the time before writing. Think about it. Before humans wrote stuff down, we don't know what they thought, because they're not telling us what they thought. If we dig something up that comes from the time before writing, we might dig up a clay pot or a little stone, god or goddess. And we basically look at that object and we start thinking, what did these people think about that object? What can this object tell us about their beliefs? After people start writing things down, we don't necessarily guess as much. We are like, we know what they thought because they told us in their writings. So writing is kind of the main thing that divides prehistory from history. So a lot of older history, Paleolithic and Neolithic eras, that's prehistory. We don't have writing. So we dig stuff up, we see cave paintings, and we have to guess what the people thought. After people start writing things down, there's still a little bit of guessing, but we start to know more what they think. These terms, Paleolithic and Neolithic, they're just Greek words. This British archaeologist, John Lubbock, kind of coined them. You don't have to remember the Greek words, but Paleos means old and lithos means stone, so Paleolithic age means the old Stone Age. If you look at slide 5, what's important about the Paleolithic age? It's when people started making primitive stone tools. Humans survived by hunting and gathering, and people dwelled or lived in temporary shelters. So you're not building cities, you're not farming, you're moving from place to place based on where the food is. You're living in stuff you build out of sticks and trees, or maybe you find a cave to live in. That's kind of the Paleolithic age. People were hunters and gatherers. They lived in small groups. They moved throughout the landscape searching for food. They lived in caves or crudely built shelters. They might settle somewhere if they found permanent food source. Sometimes there were people that would settle along bodies of water because there were always fish available. People's diet during the Paleolithic era is mostly plants, but you'd also eat fish, you'd eat small game, insects. You might hunt large game, but that's kind of hard to do sometimes. The family is the basic social unit during the Paleolithic era. The family worked together, they cooperated to gather food and to mutually protect themselves. You might have a gathering of tribes, which is just a bunch of families kind of joining together, usually under the leadership of a patriarch, maybe the strongest male in the group. You didn't have differentiations of wealth during the Paleolithic period. If you're moving around all over the place, you can't accumulate private property, so you can't start getting rich people and poor people. Everyone's kind of in it together, and everyone's probably poor. Life's not that great. Division of labor is based on your age and your sex. So the young men would do something different than the young women. The old would do something different than the young. You do have some intellectual accomplishments. Humans probably have always had thought. People communicated with each other. They had language. They do have cave paintings from the Paleolithic era, so there was some type of artistic expression. Paleolithic peoples buried their dead, and sometimes they would bury their dead with objects that we assume they wanted to take with them to the afterlife. The Paleolithic people didn't, say, we're burying our uncle and we're putting this sword with him because we want him to, or this spear because we want him to have success in hunting in the afterlife. We just think that's what they meant, but they didn't tell us that. Paleolithic people practiced something that historians have called sympathetic magic. Basically, there's a lot of cave paintings where it shows like a bison or something with a spear in them. Well, what does that mean? We assume it means that they painted what they wanted to happen. If you paint a successful hunt, you're going to have a successful hunt. If you look at slide 7, there's this really famous cave in France. It's called the Cave of Lascaux. There's a really cool video if you want to watch. It's 5 minutes long. Just click on that link or paste it into your web browser. You can kind of see somebody walking you through the cave, kind of explaining it to you. But I got some pictures of the cave paintings, so you can kind of see these are kind of cool. But you can look at those as long as you want. I'm on slide 11 now. After the Paleolithic era, we have the Neolithic era. Neolith is just two Greek words, neos, which means new, and lithos, which is stone, so new, Stone Age. That's what Neolithic means. This is really important. This is when you have the development of agriculture, you start domesticating animals, and humans start to live in permanent cities. So permanent establishments, villages, towns, and then cities. That's really important. Men, or mankind, humanity, becomes food producers, not just food consumers. So the Paleolithic age, you're basically hunting and gathering whatever nature provides. But during the Neolithic era, you start producing food on a large scale. That's really important to remember. Historians think around the year 7000, you started having the domestication of plants and animals, 7000 BC. That date's different in every textbook, so just, not set in stone, just kind of a general area of the time. Some of the most important innovations during this period, you have systematic agriculture, so people start farming. You have towns that develop into cities. You get surplus food. If you're growing all this food and you're living in the same place, you have extra food. Extra food means population increase. The more food, the more people you get. You start to get large-scale trade. You start to get, the textbook called it the nuclear family. This doesn't mean that you had mom and dad and 2 kids. It just means that you don't live in tribes as much anymore once you start living in cities. What does farming do? It leads to permanent settlements, surplus food. Think about it. You need clay pots to store all this surplus food in. People start working not just to make food, but to do other things like make clay pots for the food to be stored in. Like I said, surplus food leads to population increase. You get a division of labor. X amount of people in your city farm, X amount of people work construction, so they build your house, X amount of people make clay pots to store all the surplus grain in. You start to get a lot of different people doing a lot of different things. This leads to a variety of production. Food, clay pots. Some people build city walls. Some people make jewelry. Some people maybe make art. You just start to have people being able to do a lot of different things. And when you start having things like jewelry and clay pots and all this other stuff, that starts to and food, that leads to commerce. People start trading amongst themselves. You grow the food, you trade some food for a clay pot or some jewelry. You start trading with other cities. Maybe some other city has really good hunters and they get meat. They'll trade you for some of your grain. Just a lot of human activity starts going on. You start to have prosperity. Division of labor allows us to achieve more as a civilization. There's a great example in The Wealth of Nations by Adam Smith. He talks about the pen makers. I always use the example of McDonald's restaurant. If you had to stand at the register, take somebody's order, go back, cook the hamburger, package the hamburger, take it back up, collect their money, give them the hamburger, that would take you a long time. But if you got one person just working the register, one person just cooking the food, things go a lot quicker. You can accomplish a lot more with the division of labor, so people start doing that. With prosperity comes private property, so you start to have wealthy, the poor. And when humans settle into cities, they start having social and political organizations. So, you need government. Who's going to build the city walls to protect you? You got to organize government to get the people to kind of do that. Who's going to build all the irrigation to grow the food? Some places in Mesopotamia are pretty dry. Well, you're going to have to come together as a community to build irrigation ditches. So those things are important. If you want to look at something pretty cool, Stonehenge is a good example of what humans can accomplish together. So historians think it was built sometime between 3000 and 1600 BC. I got a really short video on Stonehenge on slide 14. If you want to, just click on it. It's kind of cool. It kind of explains how Stonehenge is aligned with the sun and the stars, and when the sun's a certain position, it kind of maps it out at Stonehenge. It's pretty cool. But humans could accomplish a lot even with limited tools they had during the Neolithic era. I got kind of a little caveman cartoon guy on slide 15. During the Paleolithic era, you can't accumulate property because you're always moving around. But during the Neolithic era, you start to grow your own food. Your crops don't move around, they stay in one field. So then you can start collecting, all kinds of stuff, whether that's good or bad. If you look at slide 17, there's kind of a cool place called Çatalhöyük. I think that's how you say it. It's a place in modern Turkey. It's just a kind of a Neolithic, site that archaeologists have found. Kind of cool. Shows you what else humans were up to during the Neolithic era. So look at slide 18. Those are all the things farming allows you to accomplish. So farming is really important. Don't forget, farming is what makes the Neolithic age important and distinguishes it from the Paleolithic age. Last slide, slide 19, just a quick review, kind of the important stuff. So So yeah, I won't have any more video lectures until we start talking about the Greeks. So I'm going to have you read chapters 1 and 2, and that will kind of be how you learn about Mesopotamian cultures and civilizations in Egypt. So once we get to the Greeks, I'll see you again in the video lectures.